In the depths of the Palace of the Dead, we find within the rooms that we encounter both Ixtab and Edda a seal with a striking resemblance to the sigil of the Order of the Twin Adder of modern Gridania, which apparently represents the unity of Elzin and Hjör entwined around the lotus of the Pajali. No doubt the serpents also represent the wood whalers and the god's quiver, whom protect the 12's wood from within and without, respectively, but just as the immortal flames have appropriated an old Belladine symbol, transplanting the fruit of knowledge with the gem of avarice, it seems that the Gridanians too have simply bastardized an ideogram of their ancestors, which as it is found in the ruins of Galmorah represents something very different, something that should hint at the true function of the so-called Palace of the Dead. The twin serpents wound about a staff or rod is a symbol commonly seen in our own culture, but just like the twin adder sigil, its usage generally comes from a misinterpretation of a much older icon. In the West, the caduceus has been used widely as the insignia for medical professions since it was erroneously adopted by the US Army Medical Corps at the beginning of the 20th century, confused with the rod of Asclepius wielded by the Greek god of medicine, which featured only a single snake. The caduceus, on the other hand, is borne by Hermes or Mercury, the messenger, thief, merchant, and most importantly to us today, Psychopomp, essentially one whom guides the souls of the deceased towards the afterlife. A popular theory among contemporary historians is that the caduceus staff of Mercury is actually a remnant of the original Babylonian or Mesopotamian manifestation of this god as a serpent deity of the underworld, Ningish-Zida, whose symbol was an identical caduceus, predating that of Mercury by at least a millennium. It cannot be an accident that Ningish-Zida herself appears in the Palace of the Dead, along with this original version of the Twin Adder sigil. I'm quite certain that when we speak of the underworld and of Psychopomps, we're on the right path to understanding the true purpose of the palace, of this symbol, and of what so far appears to be the central cult of Galmorah. Mercury isn't the only Psychopomp orbiting this place. Ixtab, whom we encounter on the 40th floor, is named for a Mayan death goddess, one whom accompanies practitioners of honorable suicide, generally by hanging, into the afterlife. Floors 31 through 50 in particular are residents to a number of coffins, which suggests that the place is a kind of mausoleum, but it is not a particularly efficient one, as there is a great deal of negative empty space with no clear function. Furthermore, the undead and void sent that stalk the halls don't seem to be new tenants. The palace is littered with pomanders, artifacts containing incense and herbs that were commonly used by medieval Christians not only to ward off evil smells, but foul spirits and numinal taints as part of many religious ceremonies. Even the palace's guardian Ochu, Spurge, is named for a plant derived from the Old French asperger, which means to ward or cleanse. This spurge is in essence a giant, living pomander. Clearly the Gelmorrans were quite used to the prospect of sharing this space with and having to mitigate the presence of undead and a void sense, a space which was seemingly not designed exclusively for corpses. No, I believe that between the pomanders, the floor plan that accommodates the living to move through this place as much as it does the dead to rest here, and the iconography of what is most likely a deity of the dead and dying, the Palace of the Dead is equal parts mausoleum and temple. So let's talk a little more about the origins of Galmorah and why a psychopomp might become such a salient cultural icon to its people. The founders of Galmorah had effectively watched the world end. A realm-wide war eclipsed by the destruction of all civilization, a great purging flood, and the banishment of the Amdapori survivors from the surface into a literal underworld. It is not hard to imagine that they would have come to think of their new life in the dark as a purgatory, a place to which they had been banished between life and death, in which they would await pending absolution for their sins before finally being allowed into a blissful afterlife. I think the Gelmorran Caduceus suggests that this torment faced by the city's founders was passed into the mythology and the culture of Galmorah, and that they came to worship as their patron deity a figure not unlike Mercury, Ningish-Zida, or Ixtab, a psychopomp that had guided them into purgatory and would watch over their slow crawl towards redemption. They had no real problem then with worshipping and perhaps even living in the same spaces as they kept the dead, as these tombs would be more a symbol of the solace and redemption promised to all Gelmorrans than the kind of despair and sadness we might want to intuitively attach to them. They might even have respected and revered the lesser void scent that the corpses attracted, in the same way that many cultures have admired large carrion feeders, such as wolves and vultures, as servants or representatives of the divine. The one real difference between this god's symbol and that of the Order of the Twin Adder is that rather than the lotus, which represents the Pajali, we have some other kind of plant, something perhaps vaguely resembling a dandelion. I believe the most likely candidate is something like this luminous flower that we can find growing beneath the 12's wood still today in places like the Thousand Moors of Totorak. When the Gelmorran founders were first forced underground, this would have been the only source of light to be found for a time, and it would well have seemed as a divine gift from a god of the underworld that would guide them through this purgatory. It seems fitting, therefore, that the same flower would eventually become a part of Gelmorran religious iconography. Although we do not find the Gelmorran Caduceus apparent in Isom Har or around the Gelmorran ruins in the North Shroud, we do find it somewhere else that is explicitly a place of both death and reverence, the Tamtara Deepcroft, resting place of most importantly the Gelmorran king Galvanth. In any case, everything about the Palace of the Dead makes it an ideal resource for whatever evil, presumably Ascian, that is now using it. After all, corpses are to void magics, as crystals are to summoning rituals. Perhaps the palace is now being used as a lure for even more living souls to become lost in and ultimately feed and fuel some terrifying void-sent abomination. Or perhaps it is a massive net intended to catch the departing souls of the dead on their way back to the life stream, preventing their ether from returning to Hydaelyn and thus interrupting the very circle of life. All we know for sure is that a further 150 floors are being planned for the Palace of the Dead, and that this malignant plot must therefore go far deeper than the madness of Edda. I hope that you found these past few videos exploring the lore of the Palace of the Dead illuminating and entertaining. If you have any theories of your own or thoughts on mine, I would love to hear them, so do please leave a comment below. Like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, I'm Ethys, and thanks for listening.